Good morning, everyone. Well, I guess it might not be morning if you're not listening to this in the morning, but it's morning where I am right now, about 10:15 a.m. And I'm really excited to bring you this episode of the podcast. Brooke Jones is a remarkable woman doing lots of really exceptional work in the world around kindness and mindfulness and preparing our next generation for the inevitable challenges that they will face, hoping to train and prepare kids and adults and, everyone to see the world, see their potential, see what's possible in a completely different way. And I'm really excited for you to hear our beautiful conversation. Brooke and I met when we did our TEDx last year in Denver, and I was so honored to have the opportunity to share that couple of days with that really amazing group of women. And you just, you have to stop and you have to recognize how amazing the universe is sometimes. But, not all of our days are wrapped up in such exciting things as TED Talks and podcast interviews. And one of the things that I have always struggled with in my life is the mundane, the boring, the day-to-day stuff, the life stuff. And I was reading this morning from Wherever You Go, There You Are, the Jon Kabat-Zinn culture altering book about mindfulness. And I came across this passage that I wanted to read you guys by Gary Snyder, author of The Practice of the Wild. And this section of the book is called In the Spirit of Mindfulness, Part 3. And Gary Snyder writes, all of us are apprenticed to the same teacher that the religious institutions originally worked with, reality. Reality Insight says, master the 24 hours, do it well, without self-pity. It is as hard to get the children herded into the carpool and down the road to the bus as it is to chant sutras in the Buddha hall on a cold morning. One move is not better than the other. Each can be quite boring, and they both have the virtuous quality of repetition. Repetition and ritual and their good results come in many forms. Changing the filter, wiping noses, going to meetings, picking up around the house, washing dishes, checking the dipstick. Don't let yourself think these are distracting you from your more serious pursuits. Such a round of chores is not a set of difficulties we hope to escape from, so that we may do our practice, which will put us on a path. It is our path. It seems so obvious to, when you see it written, that, the moments of simply being and doing what needs to be done are the best teachers in our lives. And it's a lesson that I work hard to learn. And, I like to daydream. I like to be thinking about what's to come. And, but when I find myself in those moments, it's, if I allow it, if I allow, the dropping in and then just being, those can be the best moments of the day. It's an ongoing practice. It's an ongoing work that I probably will never master. And I guess to some degree, I hope I never do. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you this morning. I really hope that you enjoy this episode of the If You Could See Me podcast. my conversation with the fantastic and wonderful Brooke Jones, Vice President of the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation and a life coach. See you guys soon. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode in the podcast. My name is Erin Mahone, and I am extremely honored and excited today to be joined by Brooke Jones, the Vice President of the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation and a life coach based in the Denver, Colorado area. Brooke, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So before we get started, if you wouldn't mind, please talk to us about the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation. It's just a wonderful organization, but one that I'm not sure all of our listeners have heard of before.
No problem. I had not heard of it actually until I started working here. We are a small foundation in Denver that started actually in the Bay Area about 20 years ago around this summer of violence that they were having in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the press was so focused on these violent acts that were happening that one of the reporters wrote an op-ed piece saying, can we stop talking about these random acts of violence and start talking about random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty? And from that, the phrase became famous and the foundation was born, and it was shortly thereafter moved here to Denver. And we've spent the last 20 years or so focusing on how to reach people in various ways to spread kindness. And that started, I think probably a lot of people will remember the bumper stickers and coffee mugs that all said, practice random acts of kindness. And we realized as time went on that we wanted to create a stronger, deeper impact, more lasting impact. And so we focused our efforts in schools and created a kindergarten through 12th grade curriculum that we offer for free to schools that's based in this theory of social emotional learning and preparing kids socially and emotionally for all of the things that they have to deal with, both as children and then as teenagers and again as adults. So how they communicate with each other, how they take care of themselves, how they manage difficulty, how they become more resilient, how to look for and practice gratitude and compassion and kindness and respect and integrity. So all of these things sort of fold up into a really fun and simple curriculum that we offer to schools.
It's so wonderful, and it brings to my mind. I was at a speaking author event a few days ago, and we were talking about, in this particular event, we were talking about mental health advocacy. And during the book signing portion, this woman came up to me and was, talking about or asking me how to get involved with her legislators. Mm-hmm. And I said, do you know who they are? Call them, email them, talk to them, visit with them, let them know what's important to you. And she said, but that seems so small. Isn't there something bigger I could be doing? Mm. And I looked at her and I said, but imagine if we all did it. Imagine how big it could be if everyone took the time to do that. And this is that same sort of reflection that, the things that you guys are talking about and so beautifully teaching the youth and the kids of, that are going to run the world in the future is about those small moments, those random acts of kindness, but also the gratitude and the self-care and the day-to-day things that people often feel are too small to really make a difference. So can you talk a little bit about, your perspective, both professionally and personally in that regard?
Absolutely. And there's science around all of this, but I think it's funny. Somebody just gave me a really lovely children's book this week that I think it's called The Hummingbird, and it's this very sweet story of there's a forest fire, and the animals all run out of the forest, right, to escape the fire, and they're all standing on the edge watching the fire, and they're scared and they don't know what to do, and they keep seeing this little hummingbird who goes over to the lake and grabs one drop of water and flies into the fire and drops the water and goes back and gets another one and flies back in and drops it. And all the animals are looking at the hummingbird saying, what are you doing? You're not making a difference. You're not going to put the fire out by dropping one drop of water. And the hummingbird says, this is what I can do. Right. And so while she may not put the whole fire out, she's doing what she can. And that's exactly right. So if all of them jumped in, if everybody jumps in and does what they can, then things will change. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we talk about with kids and with adults, and it's such a fascinating phenomenon, that when you do an act of kindness, there are three parties that benefit from this physiologically. And one is obviously the person doing the act of kindness gets that little rush of joy, right? If you pay for the coffee behind you, or even just let somebody into traffic, or you open the door for somebody, you get that feeling of joy. And then the person who receives it also feels, thankful that, oh, thank God somebody let me into traffic, or what a lovely thing to do that somebody bought me coffee. I mean, when it happens to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like a gift. Right. Amazing thing, right? Yeah. And then there's the third party, which is the witness. So if somebody sees that happen, they actually receive the same physiological benefit and the same dopamine rush and serotonin, and they get the same benefit. So there's this triangulation effect, and they all are then inspired to do something themselves. So it just sort of fans out, right, in that ripple effect that we've talked about when we talk about kindness. Yeah. It really does exist.
It really does exist. It's so funny. I was at the grocery store the other day, and there was an older gentleman who was wandering around the parking lot, and he couldn't find his car, and he was shuffling and moving very slow, and he looked confused. And so, I parked my car and I walked over to him and I said, "Sir, do you need help finding your car?" And he was like, no, I'll be fine. And then after another minute, I noticed that I kind of stood to the side, and I kind of noticed that he was still looking, and he really couldn't find it. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm sure you'll be able to find it eventually, but I've done this 1,000 times. I lose my car all the time in the parking lot. And so I'm going to help you. What's your car look like? Mm-hmm. And so he told me, it's a gold Lexus. Okay. And so I'm looking, all over the parking lot, and he's looking, as quickly as he can move. And then this woman and her son overhear us, and she says, "Oh, a gold Lexus. There's a gold Lexus over there." And it became like a party in the parking lot where we were all trying to find this gentleman's car. And we found it, and he was so grateful, but there was this moment of connection among these four sort of disparate people who may not otherwise ever have come together. And it's small, but again, it adds up.
It does. And you see it over and over again, right? In these horrible, tragic crisis moments. You think of 9/11 or any of the recent school shootings, that they're just awful. And you sort of stand aside and think, this is never going to get better, or what can I do here? But the reality is it happens every time that communities pull together and take care of each other in the way that we never really see otherwise. I mean, and when I say we don't see it, it's that we're not tuned into it. But moments like what you're talking about right there is one of those moments where a community just pulled together to say, this person needs help. It's not, the end of the world, that if everybody walked on, he would have eventually found his car. But what a wonderful and beautiful moment that that all of you shared, and you still remember it. It wasn't this passing thing that was sort of invisible in your day. It was very real.
Right. And it didn't matter who we were. It didn't matter what our political beliefs were. It didn't matter what side of the train tracks we lived on. We were just in that moment for people with a common goal.
Yep.
So you and I met during the TEDx presentation process, which was probably one of the most gratifying and certainly the most terrifying thing I've ever done.
I agree.
You talked about, your personal experiences with abuse as a child and trauma as a child. And, your presentation was beautiful, and I will post a link to your TED Talk on the page with the podcast so that people can check that out. But can you talk to me about how you and your personal experiences became a person who is so focused on kindness after sort of seeing the worst of humanity as a child? You can always go one direction or the other direction. How did you end up in this direction?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that I don't think I had the answer to until very recently. And just to, nutshell was, as a child, I suffered abuse, sexual abuse at the hands of my father, and at the time knew that this was wrong, right? But as a child, you don't know that your reality is different than other people's reality. It's just your reality. And so it's one of those where people ask, like, well, why didn't you ever say anything? Or, women who are abused, why didn't you ever say anything? Those kinds of things. When it's your reality, you sometimes don't know that you should say something, or who would I tell and what would they say and all of that. So I never said anything, but what I recall was that he committed suicide at when I was 9 years old, and when I went back to school, I was so afraid of how my secret had gotten out and how the kids would respond to me, or teachers. People are quick to set people outside of a circle, right? To leave them out of society when they're damaged or broken or just different. And I was afraid of that. And it was the first time in my life when I got back to school and people were so welcoming and warm and loving and caring and concerned and sympathetic, and go down the list of all the things. They were all of those. And I didn't expect it. And so it was at that point, I think there was a change. I don't know that I recognized it at 9 years old, but I did realize that people are good, right? I didn't think people were good. When I think about my dad, he was in many ways a monster to me. But this world opened up where I thought, no, people do want to take care of other people, and they want to see other people succeed, and they didn't see me as broken and somebody that they would write off. So that moment, I kind of realized people are kind, and I want to be one of those people. I want to do something for others when they are in difficult or painful or traumatic situations. And so that kind of stuck with me through time. And there have been multiple moments like that. And then when I got pregnant and gave birth to my daughter, I went through a pretty rough period, a long period of postpartum depression. And again, I felt like this broken person that, I just felt worthless. Like I had this beautiful, lovely, healthy, amazing baby that I wanted. And yet as soon as she was born, I didn't want her. And the people, again, that were in my life just surrounded me with so much support and love and kindness. And I don't think I would have gotten through any of it without that amount of support and kindness. And she and I talk about it today. She's 12 now, and we talk about it a lot. I'm very open with her about what I went through and how none of this was personal to her. And this was a medical issue that I was going through. It was a hormonal imbalance, and that it was never about not wanting her in my heart. It was more what was going on in my body. And so it was important to me to instill in her that no matter what people are going through, and people are always going through something that we don't know, that we are kind and loving and supportive to them. And so I think passing that along to her has reinstilled it in me that this is who we are as humankind, that we take care of each other. That is what we do. And even when we're seeing what we see in the news and all this horrible stuff, right? Those are, to me, they are examples of outliers. But in reality, we as a species take care of each other, and we are kind to each other. We just have to remember how to get in touch with that. And at times where we are feeling selfish or we're feeling disgruntled by everything else going on, and it's very easy to go to the negative. It's very easy to go to anger and frustration, and believe me, I go there a lot, but I really try and keep that as my foundational perspective on things.
We have the choice to, act in judgment or in compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, it requires us to slow down. This is sort of like the new mantra of my life. It's everything I talk about is, we live in such a fast-paced world, and we want everything to just, be the way we expect it to be. We want people to be the way we expect them to be, and we want time to move the way that we want it to, and everything's supposed to line up. And when that gets interrupted, when our trajectory gets interrupted, we get very frustrated, and we blame each other, and we could benefit so greatly from the act of slowing down. And in those moments when, something throws us out of our comfort zone, we can have a conversation with ourselves. Wait, slow down. What are you responding to here? Are you really mad at that person, or are you mad that, you have to take your eye off the thing that you were focused on? And when we can become conscious of that, and we can choose not to judge people in their pain, I think that what you said is so powerful, that, there's the psychological phenomenon of blaming the victim. I mean, it's something that we do as a human race. And when we choose not to do that, which is very difficult, it can just change everything. And I think that, above and beyond all the things that we teach our children in their formal education, I think that level of compassion and self and honesty with oneself is probably the most important thing for humanity moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's much easier to take the road of what's right in front of us, right, and decide in this moment. And right now, especially, right, with politics, I do it a lot to say, I don't like that decision that was made, or he's crazy, or she's nuts, or those. It's really easy to go there, but it's much harder to stand back and say, I wonder why that decision was made. I don't agree with it. It wouldn't have been the decision I made, but I don't know the whole story. Right. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. I'm not sure what the butterfly effect here is of that choice. And maybe there is a bigger picture that I need to think about, or to simply say, I don't like what happened there. I don't agree with it, but I'm going to let it go. I can't control it. And but I can control my reaction in this moment.
I have this conversation with myself often, and maybe you can, as a kindness leader in the world, maybe you have some sort of expert opinion. But, I am always going to be a person who, veers toward love and peace and kindness, and trying to understand the person that I am at odds with. And then I think about what a privilege that is for me as, a middle-class educated white woman. I am not, to any large degree, fighting for my life in the streets. So it's difficult for me because I don't want to feel as if saying love thy neighbor is cavalier or is, disregarding of senseless pain and horror that so many people are facing in living in different bodies and different experiences in America in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that. I just had sort of a slap in the face of this exact thing the other day. I was on a flight home from Miami, and I sat next to a gentleman that I didn't talk to him most of the flight. I think we were both, watching a movie or something. And then probably 2 hours before we landed, we started chatting, and came to find out that he spent almost 11 years in prison on a 28-year sentence for murder. And I could feel myself going, oh boy, I'm sitting next to a murderer, right? I'm immediately judging this guy. And came to find out that, in fact, he was there wrongfully had been accused, and the person who did commit the murder had come forward 10 years after the fact. And he was let out early, and it was crazy. He was sharing, articles. It was showing articles of him. It was a pretty famous case. We talked about it, and I just said to him, I don't know how you could not be incredibly resentful and angry and go down the list of emotions. And he said, what good do those emotions serve? I spent 11 years in prison. He missed, his daughter was born 4 months before he went into prison. So he missed most of her life, right? So many reasons I'm sitting there feeling angry for him. And he said, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And we talked about that for a bit. And then, we were talking a little bit about what I do and going into schools. And he said, I love what you do and I love this work, but he said, that from where I come from, which is a pretty rough neighborhood with a lot of kids who have lives you wouldn't even believe. And I said, I can't imagine. I'm sure that's true. And he said, so as much as I love the work you're doing, that you're speaking to a very privileged sort of upper middle class white group of people most of the time. And he's right. I mean, we go into schools in rural and inner city schools and that kind of thing. But he said, they have one look at you and they realize in 2 seconds that you're not speaking to them. They're not speaking to you. You didn't live the same life. So he said, you really need somebody like me to go into some of these schools and say, this is what kindness looks like to somebody like me who has lived a very different life, a very, challenging existence. And this is what it looks like to not be angry, to not be resentful, to not want to, go kill this guy who let me sit in prison for 11 years, all these things. And it was such a eye-opening experience to listen to him and understand what kindness means to everybody. It's something different to everybody. And in his case, it was very different than my story, and it would resonate with a whole different group of people. And I have to keep that in mind as we do this work, and as all of us kind of go out and live our daily lives, that what this looks like to you or me is very different than what it looks like to somebody else. And how do we kind of live in kindness and love and peace, knowing that it doesn't look the same to everybody else?
I want to let that sit for a second, because we have such good intentions so often, but there is so much and I'm not, directing this statement at you so much as at all of us who do this. There's so much even unintended ego that goes along with this work. And we want to be the kind of people that we want to be in the world. And so we think, well, I'm coming at this from good intentions, and I want to help. But so often we don't stop long enough to think about what helping really means.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you sharing that story. And I know that you will go forward in the future with a different lens on that. And I think that that's incredible. And I'm so glad you had that conversation with that gentleman. But just in speaking to all of the helpers out in the world who, may be listening to this, it's so important for us to have these conversations, messy and awkward as they may be, difficult as it may be for us to kind of admit the areas where we're lacking. How much is in your work is that kind of humility important to getting to the root of what you do? And do you fight with your own ego in this process? And if you don't, tell us how, please.
Oh, no. I wish I could say I don't. I do. I think it's inevitable, and because we are who we are and we come from the lens that we come from. It's funny that when you talk about humility, I always sort of pair that word with vulnerability, and I think of Renee Brown's work, and which to me has been incredibly powerful, and it's so powerful that as we're sort of reworking our curriculum right now, and one of these concepts, we have these kind of sub-concepts of generosity and gratitude and integrity, right, that go under kindness, and we added humility and vulnerability as concepts that we feel, and I personally feel that are incredibly important to teaching kids, right? Because, and I think this is very much in America, this idea of becoming so, we tell ourselves and we tell our kids how important they are and how incredible they are and how amazing we are. And some of that self-talk is very important and good and healthy, but there's something very powerful about being vulnerable and humble and letting go of your ego a little bit to say, even as children, I make mistakes and I could have done better with that. Or, mom or dad, I could have done better in this conversation. I'm sorry, my attitude sucked right there, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And we do, my daughter does this with me all the time, where I'll kind of look at her like, okay, you might want to check yourself on that. And she maybe in the moment won't say, I'm sorry, you're right. She'll come back later and say, I could have done better. And being open to yourself and to others to say, I could have been a better friend in that moment. I could have done this. I should have done this. And not always in a negative way, but it's taken me a long time in my life to be open about talking about what happened to me, and being open to talking about, especially with my daughter, the postpartum depression. These are sort of dirty little secrets that people keep because we are so afraid of being judged. Mm-hmm. And we are so afraid of letting people into some very personal parts of our lives. And I have found that the humility and the vulnerability that I've been able to develop over the last several years has actually opened up my world in a way that I never expected, with people who've either experienced similar things or they just want to come and give you a hug and say, I'm sorry this happened to you, and I know somebody that it happened to, or I just wish it didn't happen to you, right? That's kindness right there, to open yourself up and allow people in and let the world know that you're not perfect, because none of us are.
I call it, I want to not only end the stigma around mental illness in particular in my work, but also uh, the stigma around imperfection, that it is, or the stigma of perfection. It is okay not to be perfect. It is okay not to have all of the answers. And it's often to me like, when my kids are in a fight with one another and he did this and he did that, and well, you apologize. No, because he won't apologize to me, or he started it, or she did. And I'm just like, you know what, guys, somebody's got to go first.
Yep.
And you have to choose. Either you're going to, the fight is more important than, being in peace, but somebody is going to have to choose. And so in those moments in our lives where, we have the choice, it's terrifying. I mean, I live with anxiety, and I think that the anxiety that I live with has taught me this lesson that you're talking about, that, I'm afraid of everything. So, speaking my truth is terrifying. Opening myself up to other people is terrifying. But for whatever reason, the fear of isolation and the pretending like I'm okay is, when I'm not, is worse.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you asked me something early on about, how you come out of trauma and move forward. And there's a really interesting phrase that very few people have ever heard, but I think it's such a powerful thing to know. We always talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, and we think of soldiers generally, coming out of war. There is a phenomenon that actually is much more common than post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's called post-traumatic growth. That we just don't talk about this. And this is one of these things where people like yourself, myself, who've gone through pretty terrible things or have mental illness issues, that we take these things and try and grow from them. And it happens slowly, and there's definitely ups and downs there, but that we get to a point where we're better off, we're growing from it, and we're getting better, and we're getting better. And so it's something I would encourage you and your listeners to look up post-traumatic growth, because if it's something that, if you're dealing with mental illness or trauma in your life, that there's actually ways to come out of it even stronger and even better on the other side.
Thank you for that. I have not heard of post-traumatic growth formally. So I definitely will look it up, and that's another thing that I will link on the podcast. I'm writing these little suggestions down. I'm also going to link to the Hummingbird children's book, because that sounds wonderful.
Great.
And I totally agree with you. I think that Renee Brown has probably been the most influential person in my life, that is not someone that I know, in this work. Just, the first time I ever heard her talk about vulnerability, I had been talking about it for years in the context of using, because I had been involved in theater, and it had taught me so much, and so much of what being an artist, especially a performing artist, is, being incredibly vulnerable. And, once, and it's terrifying, but then once you've done it, you realize all of the gifts that you have received from that process. And when I heard her explaining vulnerability in the way that she does, it clicked with me that was what I was trying to say. That, she is such a gift to the world. And I'm so glad that you are including that, her work in your curriculums, because, having these conversations with our kids, and we've historically, and actually I have this conversation a lot on this podcast, we are such a consumer-based, commodified society that, over, the history of, since the Industrial Revolution, but probably beyond that, we value people based on the amount of money they have or what they produce or how famous they are, or, and therefore we don't value things like self-care and self-talk and self-discovery and creativity and spirituality and the things that make us more complete and whole. And so, do you guys think about those things from that perspective, and how to, especially when you talk about these things to kids, how to make it make sense to them in a world in which, all they get is messages about, what's on the outside?
Mm-hmm. We do. It's nice the way the curriculum has been written in a way where we bring in science and art and literature and, all of these sort of academic core subjects, so that any teacher could use it at any time. But I think of one, for instance, that I love, which is, it's called Egg in the Bottle. And what you do is, probably most people saw this experiment as a kid, but you take a bottle, sort of like a Starbucks Frappuccino bottle you'd get at the store, empty, and then a hard-boiled egg. You put a little piece of paper in the bottom of the bottle and light it on fire, pop the egg in on top of the hole. It sucks the egg in, right? It creates a vacuum, sucks the egg in. And the idea is, it's about how we talk about others and getting sucked into these negative conversations when we're standing with a group of friends and we, oh, did you see what she's wearing today? Did you see her backpack? Whatever it is, that we get sucked into these conversations, and we have a choice about not getting sucked in, and how we react again in those situations. So we talk to kids about that. We're not asking them to be heroes, right? There's sort of this in the anti-bullying movement of stand up for your friends and stand up against bullying, and that's fine, but not all of us are wired that way. And I certainly wasn't. I might see something happening in a school when I was a kid, and I'm not the kid who was going to run over there and say, hey, you guys, stop being mean to her. I would just walk by and just pretend I didn't see it. I might go tell a teacher, because we're not wired that way. We just want to fit in. As kids, we just want to fit in. Right. So ways of making them aware of, in the moment where you're being sucked into something, like, what can you do in this situation? It may not be that you're going to stand up and yell at everybody about, let's not talk about other kids. It may, however, be that you say, you guys, I got to go. I'm not interested in this conversation, or whatever it looks like for you. And we give them those tools. And then one of the other ones that I love, it's another little sort of science experiment that we do with the little kids, is we give them a little toothpaste bottle, right? A toothpaste tube. And we ask them to push the toothpaste out. And then we give them a toothpick and say, okay, now get all the toothpaste back in the tube. Well, you can't. Right? And so it's this idea of once you've put out there some words that you might regret, or things that you've said about yourself or others that you might regret, you can't take them back. Right. So how do you avoid pushing all the toothpaste out of the bottle in those moments? You've got to think about what you say, think about your words, and think about how they affect other people. And so those are a couple of examples of how we talk with kids about them.
That's wonderful. Well, Brooke, I am so appreciative of your time. It took us a few tries to get this to happen, but I'm so glad that it did. This is huge work that you're doing. It's enormous subject matter. It's so important. I could talk to you all day long, but I know that, everybody's got places to go and people to see. Is there anything else that you would like the world to know about, something that you think is of value? You've given us some really great recommendations already.
The thing I always tell people, it's I don't ask them to do anything other than just try and tune in to what's happening around you, right? Look for these moments where people are being kind to you or to somebody else, and look for opportunities to engage when you can. And it doesn't have to be the buying coffee for somebody else. It can be smiling at somebody who seems to be having a rough moment, or letting somebody merge into traffic, or letting that mom who has a crying baby and a grocery cart full of items, let them in front of you, let them go. They're having a rough moment, let them go. Are you really in that much of a hurry? So just tune in around you and look for opportunities, and recognize the moments that are happening too, because all of these things kind of build into an emotional bank account for yourself that keep you full and keep you able to pull from that bank account anytime you're going through tough times.
Such important advice. Thank you so much, Brooke. Have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to more opportunities for you and I to connect and work together. And you are an amazing gift to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin, so much.
Bye-bye.